Another edition of Beef Up Front coming your way here. We got a lot to discuss. College football playoff rankings. We now know where everybody stands with 1 week to go in of regular season action. Could we possibly see some more anarchy like this previous weekend? We'll see. Ryan Beef Coyle. I am Sean Brace. Beef, what's happening?
Rivalry week. It's hard to believe that we are here. It feels like just yesterday we were talking on New Mexico and Montana State in week 0, but it's gone it's gone super quick. But everything has been building towards this. It's a little bit better, I think, than previous years. Knowing like, all right, bowls haven't meant that much. You only get the 14 playoff. Now we're getting the 12-team playoff, and to just see even some of the projected matchups as of tonight, it's going to be awesome. The environments, everything that goes into it. It's going to be a hell of a next month or so. So really looking forward to it. But we still got a week of chaos upon us, I think.
As you pointed out, rivalry week, and of course, upsets happen quite frequently this week. So hopefully, we get a little bit more of that. And this previous weekend, a lot of chaos
Yeah.
happened, and we kind of knew that. Look, a lot of this stuff was going to work itself out, and as we saw the playoff, the bracket being released, you're able to see like, okay, if this team handles business, one more week, one more game to go, they're going to be in. There will be teams that have an opportunity to play in their conference championship games that, yes, if they win that, then they're going to get in. If they lose, they're probably not going to get in. I really do think that a lot of this is going to work out in the long run. And, that makes me happy with 12 teams. Now, does that mean it's a surefire thing every single season? No, that's definitely not the case. And I do believe that they will add the 16, but right here, right now, 12 teams. We know we've been through this for a few weeks now as far as who's locked into those bids. But let's go ahead real quick before we dive into what those playoff rankings are. I just want to get your thoughts as far as the big one from last week. We talked a ton about Indiana and Ohio State. No surprise, I was on Ohio State, given the big number at 10.5 came down at kickoff. Indiana's a good team. Are they above average team? Sure. Are they a great team? All right. I think that they would lose to Georgia. I think they'd lose to Texas. I think, you can go down the list of some of these teams at the top. Penn State's an interesting one. I think Penn State would beat them, but Penn State didn't look good. But, I just feel like that game played out essentially how I thought it was going to be. Your takeaway from Indiana and Ohio State.
Yeah, I mean, that was a great first drive for what they did to march down the field. But after that, like even Ohio State was in a 3rd and 35 situation. They get off the field there. They're able to get off the field and potentially go up 14-0. That could be a different ball game. But from then on out, they kind of looked like they were out swinging their weight class a little bit. Ohio State looked like Ohio State. Indiana looked like Indiana. But when you go back to Indiana, the best thing that could have happened to them happened that day with both Alabama and Ole Miss losing and picking up a 3rd loss. If that was just Ole Miss and Alabama's 2nd loss of the season, then I think they would both be in still over over Indiana. At the end of the day, you can say I could look at this team, I can look at this team, and this team would win. But at the end of the day, Indiana's sitting there at 10-1. They're a 30-point favorite this weekend against Purdue. They're going to be 11-1, and with Alabama and Ole Miss shooting themselves in the foot as double-digit favorites last week and losing, that's their fault. That's their problem, and they're most likely going to be on the outside looking in. I'd be very surprised if we got to next week, next Sunday, or 2 Sundays. No, yeah, it is next Sunday already. I can't believe it's the conference championships next week. But next Sunday, I'd be very surprised as long as Indiana takes care of business and wins this weekend against Purdue. They'll be in, and Alabama and Ole Miss will be out. There is a chance maybe Alabama or Ole Miss potentially sneaks in, given the results of some of the games this weekend or some of the conference championships. But I don't think you can put a 3-loss squad in over a 1-loss team. At the end of the day for Indiana, even if they played a weak conference schedule, they're still playing in the Big Ten, and they played everyone who was in front of them and beat them all up. But besides Ohio State, who has an argument to be the number 1 team in the country.
Yeah, I agree. And with the losses that happened last week, of course, as you pointed out, the benefactor at Indiana, and the other one would be, of course, the ACC, which now could possibly be looking at 2, maybe 3 teams. If Clemson does beat South Carolina, I have a hard time not putting Clemson in to the mix. And again, they're going to play in No, they're not. They're not going to play in the conference championship game because SMU is already there, and Miami will get there with the victory over Syracuse. So, essentially, Clemson is in if they beat South Carolina, correct?
There's a chance. I don't know if that's going to be a guarantee. Like that, I could kind of go back to the conversation of who did you beat, and start breaking down the X's and O's of resumes. But Clemson sitting there knocking on the door, I think has to feel good going into this week. I believe that I believe that game's at home as well. But South Carolina has an argument that they're playing like a top 5 team right now for the way that they've played over the past 6 to 7 weeks. I don't think anyone would want to play them. Just the hard thing is with South Carolina, when you look at them, they lost to Alabama. So it'll be hard to put a 3-loss South Carolina in over a 3-loss South Carolina in over a 3-loss Alabama if it gets to that at the end of the day.
Agreed. 2.5-point spread, Clemson favored. That is a noon kickoff on Saturday. So a lot to look forward to, of course, with this week's action. Putting a bow on last week's games. Unfortunate to see Colorado. They had an opportunity to just cruise right into it. And I forgot also the benefactor of the chaos that happened between Alabama and Ole Miss losing. Tennessee is now on the inside of the house. And all they got to do is hold down against Vanderbilt this weekend, and they'll be into the college football playoffs. So a lot working itself out, and we got a big week in front of us. Before we talk about the games and the spreads that are coming up this week, of course, with Thanksgiving happening, so we got football happening all week long. Let's go ahead and bring this up, Beef, if you wouldn't mind. This is the college football playoff, and this is the bracket that was released this week here, so fresh and brand new. What stood out to you the most, if anything, as far as with the bracket is concerned?
I think there's 2 teams that are in winning-in situations this week. You mentioned Tennessee, but I think you throw Notre Dame in there as well. Tennessee with Vandy, Notre Dame this week with USC. Both of those teams aren't going to the conference title game, but both of those teams, they win, they're in. Georgia's sitting there at 8. I thought maybe that they could be potentially at 7 or 6 or something like that. Georgia Tech, I think they'll win that game. They're a 20-point favorite. I think it's sitting at right now. But Georgia Tech has been a stingy team. Like, I don't think it's going to be an absolute cakewalk. But in the SEC title game, it's already set in stone because if Georgia just say were to lose to Georgia Tech this week, that's an ACC game. That's a non-conference game. Georgia's already in the title. They'll play the winner of Texas versus Texas A&M this week. But just say if Georgia falls in the SEC title game and is a 9-3 team, do they get in? Like sitting there at 8, are they 100% safe? That goes back to the question: would they go in over an 11-1 Penn State or an 11-1 Indiana? If it comes down to that, if you got to pick, 2 of those 3. When you look at SMU, when you look at Miami, like you're going to start getting down into the thick of things.
Mm-hmm.
Does Georgia? Is it harmful to them to be playing in this SEC title game? That's going to be, I think, one of the main talking points because we haven't seen it before. We haven't seen it in the past with the 12-team playoff. The conference championship always meant the most because you needed that pretty much to feel like you were safely in the field because Georgia last year even was number 1. But then they lose to Alabama and they fall completely out of the playoffs. So does playing in the SEC title game, is that used against you if you lose? Or is that kind of just a potential resume adder and it can't get dinged on you because you're playing an extra game than everyone? But Georgia's sitting there at 8. I think it's that's going to be a curious kind of talking point.
I know another talking point that was getting a ton of traction in this couple days, and I think it started last week up in the 5-12 corner portion of your bracket. I feel like it's March Madness. I love it. Hey, it's college basketball season, Maui. It's feast week, baby. It's feast week.
Great game.
Oh, God, great games all over. And then we got the battle for Atlantis. Yes, college basketball is officially here as well. But staying with the college football here, at the top, of course, Arizona State and Ohio State, then Boise State there. And for Oregon, winner of Tennessee, Georgia. It's like, hey, wait a minute. If you wouldn't you rather have a shot at Boise State again, who you already beat this season? Or, look, and these are the things that they're going to have to work on over the years. This is year 1, so I don't hear any complaints. What's at stake. You know how this was going to be handled. The picture started presenting itself and being a little bit more clear every single week. Is it sour grapes? I mean, it's just the bracket. It's the bracket. What do you want? But there is something to keep your eye on with that one. And, just the again, if this was the college football playoff here, it is pretty cool to see, that Tennessee Georgia game, possibly I mean, Notre Dame should just roll right there. You'd get the matchup of Penn State and Indiana, but Notre Dame and Texas is a great game. Of course, Miami waiting. So there's a lot of exciting matchups that are presenting themselves if it does hold true to this current bracket right here.
Yeah, I'd say one more thing that I'm looking for with that is the three teams that have been kind of firmly in there in the bye with Miami, Oregon, and Texas. Like Oregon could lose to Ohio State in the title game. Texas could might not even make the title game, but they could lose to Georgia in the title game, and Miami could lose to SMU. So all three of these teams that have been pretty much sitting here in the bye spot for the majority of the rankings so far, they might not even make it to the bye round. They could be in this first round, and their season kind of completely slipped on its head. So that's something interesting, and that I'm going to be monitoring as well.
All right. Yeah. And the first two out, Alabama and Clemson, again, with the conference championships games and this week, final regular season of action, there is a lot to play for. So nobody is locking anybody in just yet. I would say, I apologize. Who does Oregon have this weekend?
I don't know off the top of my head. I know regardless they're in the title game, but no one.
Well,
Against them.
essentially, Oregon.
Sorry, it's Washington this week.
Oregon and Washington. Okay. Oregon is 100% in. I don't see Ohio State,
Yeah.
Even if they were to lose, I still think that they're going to find their way in. Um, and then from there on, honestly, Beef, I think Notre Dame is towing the line. Now I expect them to beat USC, but that's a tough loss with Northern Illinois. That's probably the worst loss out of all those teams that are listed right there.
Yep.
So for the most part, I think everybody is in if they continue to obviously win. But for them, I think if Ohio State does lose and Oregon does lose, they're still going to be finding themselves into the 12-team playoff. Everybody else don't know if they can afford a loss at this point in time. So with that being said, let's talk a little bit about the action that's coming up. And we actually have a football game on Thanksgiving night, Memphis and Tulane. Now, Beef, you know this. We're all going to be fired up watching NFL, but everybody's got a couple extra screens these days, and you got a couple extra pops in you. 13.5-point spread on Tulane and Memphis. Lead us to the promised land. Which way you looking?
Yeah, this used to be a tradition. This used to be the Egg Bowl, Ole Miss versus Mississippi State. They removed that. They put that on Friday afternoon now, I believe. But I like the over in this game. You look at both these teams being able to put up points all year. I have a Memphis future of over 9 wins, so I'll kind of be locked in on that, whether or not they get that or that becomes a push. But Tulane's been rolling, and when you look at the rankings too, I think Tulane was at 16 and you had Arizona State at 15. If some chaos happens this week in the Big 12, there's a scenario that if Tulane rolls in this one and then rolls Army in the title game, that Tulane could be that fourth team in the fourth the to go with Boise. They could be the fifth team in, and the Big 12 could be out in its entirety. If you have a look at what the rankings are right now, there is a chance that Tulane could hop Arizona State, BYU, Iowa State, and Kansas State. I think are the 4 teams left. Colorado, I think, still has a dark horse chance, but Tulane has something to play for still in terms of style points. So if you think Tulane's going to win, I would lay the points with them as well because they want to continue to run up the score and make their case and their resume that they should be, that 5th automatic conference bid. But I do like the over in this one. I think we see a lot of points. Both teams have shown the ability to put up 30, 40 on multiple occasions this year.
All right, then we get to Black Friday, and there is an NFL game. We got the Raiders and Chiefs. That's going off at 3:00, but there is a ton of college football on Black Friday. We'll open up with a good one featuring Colorado. Everybody loves to watch them, even though they ended up losing last week. Still, you enjoy watching them lose as well. So you tune in to see Travis Hunter and Shador Sanders, and of course Prime. And a good report today. Deion said that both of them will be playing in the bowl game no matter what. I'll believe it when I see it, but we'll see what happens there. 16.5-point spread against the Oklahoma State Cowboys. What did the Cowboys do this year, Beef?
Terrible. They were our Big 12 champ. We were talking them up, and they are about to go winless in the conference. Just completely fell apart, fell on their face. They didn't look so good in that. I think it was week 2 against Arkansas. They somehow found a way to win that game. I was like, this doesn't really look a good team. We've talked about it a couple times. Ollie Gordon has had a terrible, terrible season. Wonder if it's time for a reset down there with Gundy. If it's a
It's gotta be.
mutual parting of ways type of
They've
thing.
lost 8 straight games.
Yeah, not a single conference win. I
Yeah.
took them as a dog last week at home against Texas Tech. I was like, all right, at least have the guts to get one conference win. But that's one of the biggest underachievers in college football this year. Their over under was like 8.5. They were projected to finish second or third in the Big 12. So a completely lost season there. But with all that being said, I like the over in this game. Oklahoma State gave up over 40 last week. I think it was 45 to Texas Tech. And when you look at Colorado, if they're not going to go to the Big 12 title game, I think Dion's going to try and bump Shador's and Travis numbers as much as they can. Put the foot on the gas. Make sure Travis Hunter gets that Heisman Trophy. And let Shador continue to sling the ball. Shador's in the running for the Davey O'Brien Award for the best quarterback in the country. Leave kind of one lasting image of him in a Buffs uniform there. So I like the over in that one. OK State hasn't shown the ability to stop a soul this year, and Colorado, despite what happened last week, has shown the ability to put up points a lot this season.
All right, couple quick hitters here to close up on Friday. Games that have some significance here. Boise State, one of the top teams on that list, 19-point favorites against the Beavers. Oregon State. Any chance that we keep this close?
Yeah, I do like Oregon State to keep this close. They actually beat Washington State outright last week. Washington State had been a top 25 team for the past 6-7 weeks. And Boise State was in a dogfight with Wyoming, who was 2-9, I think, on the year. Boise State barely won that game. Yeah, 17-13. So I do think Oregon State has been playing a little bit better recently. And even the week before Boise State against San Jose State, that game was close throughout 3 quarters, and then Genty kind of broke through at the end. So maybe even if you think it stays close, maybe look at Oregon State in the first half in that one. And Ashton Genty kind of has that Saquon Barkley effect where it's the game keeps wearing down and he just looks like the same player and fresh and takes over in the second half. So maybe look at Oregon State in the first half on that one.
All right, then to the SEC. Ole Miss, 26-point favorites against Mississippi State, as you said, the Egg Bowl there. And then Georgia against Georgia Tech, 19.5-point favorites. That's at 7:30. Ole Miss is interesting. They were 12-point favorites, lost outright to Florida. And now you're telling me they're 26-point favorites here. Again, I understand Mississippi State, all that, but that's probably going to be a team that's, going to need some motivation there. So I think 26 might be a few too many. Your thoughts? Georgia Tech, though. That's an interesting game, right? You would hope that Georgia would hit the gas pedal and smash them, but man, we're talking 19.5 here. Your thoughts on both of those spreads?
Yeah, the Mississippi State Ole Miss, I probably won't touch just because I would rather I'd sleep better knowing I didn't bet on Mississippi State football, I think. But Mississippi, Ole Miss, you look at them, they got really nothing to play for at this point. Sure, get to 9 wins, get to a solid bowl game, but their expectations were playoff. Going into last week, they were in the playoff and they pissed down their leg at the Swamp and lose to Florida, so they're out. Now, what motivation do they have besides a rivalry game? And it's not even a good team that you're playing in your rivalry game this year. So it's probably just a stay away for me. Mississippi State, not a team worth betting on, and Ole Miss, not really motivated this week to say the least. And then when you look at Georgia Tech, great year, 7-4 potential, or definitely going to a bowl game. Probably going to go 7-5, but Georgia's either 3-8 or 2-9 against the spread this year. I know they didn't cover even against UMass last week, so they haven't been a good ATS team the entire season, especially as big favorites. So I think Georgia Tech. What did we say about Georgia Tech week 0 against Florida State? They can run the ball, and that allows you to keep it close. As long as you don't go out there and turn the football over, you're going to be in the game. Georgia has bigger things on their mind next week with the SEC title coming up. No matter what, they're guaranteed. But Georgia as well can't afford to slip up here because even if they lose this game this week, they can still win next week and get in. But next week becomes a must guarantee win to have any chance of getting in, I think, at that point. So you can look at it either side of the coin there, but I would probably lean towards Georgia Tech and their ability to run the ball, keep it close. They beat Miami just a few weeks ago, and they're playing some good ball. So I'm going to go Georgia Tech to cover out of those 2 games.
All right. Now we get to Saturday. Let's keep it moving. Let's talk about Michigan and Ohio State opening up at noon. South Carolina and Clemson. That is a monster game. Vandy and Tennessee at 11. You got what other games we got at noon? Jeez, that is just a heck of a way to start Saturday afternoon right there. Three big games with a lot of implications, of course. Ohio State, let's start there. It's disappointing that this is going to be a blowout, but still, Ohio State 20.5-point favorites. 43 is our total. Your thoughts on this one, Beef?
This like game and this whole rivalry like annoys me to really like no end as of recently. Like Michigan, sure, they're riding this 3-game win streak. But before that, like Ohio State just dominated this rivalry. I think it was 8, 9 wins in a row. And now just because Michigan's on a 3-game win streak, it's like, oh, Ohio State can never beat Michigan again. Like, what are we talking about? For my entire life, I'm 25. Ohio State has been the better team in this rivalry, and Michigan's gotten them the past few years. But it's not like it's been decisive blowouts in each of these games. Last year was right down to the wire. McCord had a chance to go down the field and score. So at the end of the day, I think this has been, obviously, no matter what the year is, this is stapled on the wall. Every sign in the building is to win this game, beat the team up north. I think Ohio State has 3 years of kind of pent up, built up frustration, and they have a chance to take it out on a much inferior Michigan team this week. So I think they show no mercy in this one. Run it up, leave the starters on the field the entire game, even with the Big Ten title next week. This game might be more important to Ryan Day and that program to make sure that they win this one. So I'm definitely laying the 21 with Ohio State. I do think there's a little bit of anxiousness and anxiety in those walls to make sure to get this one done. So maybe they come out playing a little bit tight, kind of like they did last week against Indiana. But I think they're able to self kind of correct and dominate from there on. So I really like Ohio State to win this one and cover the 21.
All right, Clemson and South Carolina, monster game. South Carolina with the win could very well just jump a ton of teams, be perfectly set up to just ease into the 12-team playoff. Don't have to worry about the conference championship game. Clemson, same thing. Let's see here. 2.5 is what we're holding steady right now on DraftKings Sportsbook. There's a noon kick. 49 is our total there. No defense being played in this one, huh, Beef?
Yeah, it's exciting like that we get like this as a meaningful game. That's another great part about the 12-team playoff. Like before a 8-3 South Carolina versus 9-2 Clemson, sure, that's a good game, but does it really have many implications? No, especially because it's a non-conference there at the end of the year. So it's awesome for this game to have some significant meeting. Even if South Carolina wins, I think there's going to need to be some major chaos for them to get in. I do think there's a much clear, more focused path for Clemson because one of their losses, obviously, the loss to Georgia, and Georgia has the potential to be the SEC champ and the 2 seed just in a couple weeks. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. But I'll go back to South Carolina. I think is playing the best ball right now of most teams in the country, like Ohio State, Oregon, maybe what we've seen from Georgia recently. But I would put them like past 3 to 4 weeks power rankings like the 5th or 6th best team in the country right now. The way that they've been playing, the way the defense has been playing, the way that Norris Sellers has grown, I think they're going to go to Clemson and win this week outright. You can keep the points. I think they're the better team, and I think they find a way to get this done. This is a Clemson team that struggled and needed a last-second touchdown to beat Pitt just a couple of weeks ago. So I like South Carolina to win this one. I think they've been playing much better competition recently. I think they find a way to get this one done and make things really interesting for the committee there if some chaos does happen.
Yeah, I like that too. It would be great to see it. This is a game that normally Clemson does win. But why not? Why not for South Carolina? They got a lot of momentum at this point in time. A lot of people believing in that program. So I'm with you on that one. 2.5, I think, kind of tells you a little bit as well. The odds makers don't have that much confidence in Clemson there, but that's a tough one. So for me, it's a coin flip, but I'll back South Carolina. Like to see them get in here too. Staying in the SEC, Vandy was one of the more friskier teams all season long. Couple upsets, of course, that big one over Alabama. Couple games that they covered, and here they're catching 11 at home against Tennessee. Tennessee has the world in the palm of their hands at this point in time, but this is a team that hasn't been exactly the consistent, bunch that they needed to be all season. So, in this moment, would it be wrong for me to back Vanderbilt out here at home plus 11?
I don't think that's a bad play at all. I'm definitely not laying it with Tennessee. just because they could win by 1 point. They could find a way to win the game by a half a point if that was a thing, and they would still get into the playoff. Literally, all they need to do is win and in. They're not a team like I talked about last week with Notre Dame. Talked about like with Indiana, like teams like that have needed in circumstances, I think, to win with style points. Tennessee just has to win, and they're in. And Vanderbilt has the chance to play absolute spoiler to their rival. So I think Vanderbilt has a lot to play for there in that regard. They're going to a bowl game, which is awesome for them, regardless. But Tennessee too, they have probably more to play for, a chance to the playoffs. So this game, I'm probably just not going to touch. I could see it kind of going either way with Vandy keeping it close, or it get kind of out of hand late because Diego Pavia might have to force some stuff in a comeback, and you get kind of a backdoor cover. So it's a no touch for me, but I really want to see this Tennessee team win and find their way into the playoff because I think they could make things interesting as one of those non-bye teams, and I think that they could make a run to the finals potentially with how good the defense is, how good the running game is, and when the passing game's clicking, I think they're one of the 2 to 3 best teams in the land.
All right. Now we fast forward to 3:30. Let's talk about Notre Dame, USC, Maryland, Penn State, and Miami and Syracuse here. 7.5. The Irish on the road in USC, favored there, 51.5. Maryland catching 24.5 against Penn State. 50s our total in that one. And then Miami, a 10.5-point road favorite in Syracuse. A ton to play for all three of those teams. It's interesting, Beef. The committee still has Notre Dame behind Penn State. Again, I'm not losing sleep over it. I think that if Notre Dame handles business, smacks around USC this week, they could jump them. At this point in time, I probably have Notre Dame in front of Penn State. I'm not going to get crazy at this right here, right now with one game to play because I believe that Notre Dame will pass Penn State if they handle business on the road at USC. Your thoughts?
Why? I'd be curious just here. Why do you believe that with the Northern Illinois loss for Notre Dame and Penn State's loss is Ohio State?
That if that game last week was suspect against Minnesota, that was a tough. They should have very well lost it. I mean, that was a game that look, they need to be a little bit better. I think Notre Dame has been putting up some serious points. And
Yeah.
again, it's how you're playing now. That's got to matter. That has to matter in their eyes. These teams that are playing right now, who's the best one standing out of the bunch? There's a lot of good football teams. I think Notre Dame's done enough to stand out. That was a very impressive impressive game against Navy where they just absolutely smashed them at Yankee Stadium. So, look, I think Notre Dame should be in front of them, but I'm not going to be upset that they're not. I do believe that if they handle business against USC, and regardless, honestly, if Penn State covers the number and wins by 30 plus, maybe they might keep them in front of them, but I do believe Notre Dame will jump them when it's all said and done. Your thoughts on that? Your thoughts on the spread as far as those two games are concerned?
I think I've been saying it since the Northern Illinois game, like ever since that game, that Notre Dame has looked awesome, and they do look like one of the best 12 teams in the country. But I still don't think that loss to Northern Illinois can be excused completely. Penn State, their only loss being to Ohio State, who very well could be the number one team come 2 weeks from now in the conference championship if they beat Oregon. They're even the number 2 team right now, and obviously because of the way the bracket works, they couldn't be the number 2 seed. But still, they're highly respected in the eyes of the committee. So I think that loss obviously is viewed as more valuable. But I also agree with your point of Notre Dame. You put those two teams on a neutral field right now. I think Notre Dame's probably a 2.5-point favorite. I'd say the way that they've been playing, and the style points there. So, but with all that being said, I like Notre Dame this week. Once again, continue to rack up those style points. They're in with a win. They're in the same ballpark as Tennessee, but you could potentially improve that seeding. You could jump a team. Maybe you do find your way up to 5, depending on conference title games this week in itself. Notre Dame's in a situation where they're not going to be playing next week, so they're just kind of sitting home watching and seeing what happens. But I do like Notre Dame to win that game in the cover. USC is not a good football team since the beginning of the year. Still shocked that they won that week 1 game against LSU, but that was one of my favorite unders this year of 7.5 there for USC. Even if they win this game, that under still cashing. So like Notre Dame a lot in this one. And then did you say you want to touch on the Penn State game against Maryland, I believe, this week.
24.5. Yeah, that and Miami given 10.5 against Syracuse.
Okay, so yeah, I'll dive a little bit more into the Miami Syracuse one. Really like the over in that game, 67.5. That's a high number, a high total for sure. But when you look at Syracuse, what can they do? They can go out and sling the ball around the yard. Kyle McCord is going to go over 4,000 passing yards on the season this week. He's got 26 touchdowns. They can throw the ball, and Miami has been susceptible to some of these passing attacks, and they don't have the greatest defense. I think Syracuse has a chance to definitely make this game interesting. Would be the most kind of crystal ball thing to lose this game and potentially not even go to the ACC title game. That would be a killer to me. But I do think Syracuse has the pieces to compete in this one and go score for score. If this game needs to be 45-42 or whatever, they can go out there and do that. So I really like the over in this one, and I do like Syracuse to keep that one close and cover. The Penn State game was really interesting to see last week. Penn State not cover as a double-digit favorite. They've been really good in that spot under James Franklin. On the road, it makes it a little tough. I did think that was a bit of a trap spot. I had them kind of in my breakdown last week of 3 teams that were double-digit favorites that could be on the upset alert lookout. And the one was Ole Miss. They lost to Florida. And then the other one was Notre Dame, and they wound up rolling against Army. And Penn State was kind of in the middle there. They still found a way to win. But James Franklin has been great as a big favorite during his time at Penn State. So take a loss with that against the spread last week. I think you have the faith with the data there and land with them this week. And Penn State covers. They have no game next week unless some absolute chaos happens. I believe it's going to be Oregon versus Ohio State in the Big Ten title game. So Penn State sound like they're going to be resting starters. They put up their foot on their gas the whole game.
Let's go to Arizona State and Arizona. Also at 3:30. Arizona State 9-point favorites. They got a ton to play for. Currently in the top 12. Any shot we can possibly get an upset in this one at 3:30 on Saturday?
Yeah, how about that? That's a team that definitely was on no one's list to even, I think, be a dark horse, like potential playoff team. Arizona State wins this, they're going to the Big 12 title game with a 10-2 record. So one of the more awesome stories in college football this year that I don't think's gotten enough attention. But where it matters, where you make your money, Arizona State, the best team in the country against the spread this year. Arizona, the worst team in the country against the spread this year. Arizona sure has a chance to play spoiler against their rival, but lay it with Arizona State. They've given you enough reasons to the entire year, and it's been a really down year for that Arizona team that's not even going to be going to a bowl game. So give me Arizona State there, and we'll see them in the Big 12 title next week with a playoff berth most likely on the line.
All right. A couple more as far as Saturday games that actually have some meaning. Trying to find the spread for Texas and A&M. Oh, it's 5.5. Currently 5.5 on DraftKings Sportsbook, 7:30 p.m. This game's going off 48.5 for our total here, and a ton to play for both teams. I believe if A&M wins, they're getting into the conference championship game. Texas, of course, we know what's at stake for them. Interesting number there. This is definitely a show me spot. This is a playoff game for both teams. And I'm going to back Texas in this one. I know it's on the road, tough place to play, tough environment, but this is a playoff game. Both teams know it. And I do expect Texas to win the game, 5.5. I would love to be given a field goal here at this spot. It's a lot of points to be given on the road, but if I'm backing one side, I have to back the Longhorns.
So you think if Texas loses this, they'll drop out of the top 12 completely?
That's a tough question. That's a hard one to answer. I probably
A&M,
not.
yeah, A&M definitely has no chance. Whoever wins this game goes to the SEC title. I just have a hard time picturing I think they're number 2 in the bracket right now, Texas. I have a hard time picturing them dropping that far, but at the same time, they've beaten no one. They've beaten Michigan. They've beaten, I think they ranked Arkansas as like a key win and Vanderbilt. They haven't really beat anyone. So if they go to A&M this week and lose, I don't think it's completely out of the question that they would be out there with 2 losses, but that's something to monitor. And Quinn Ewers had an MRI this week on his ankle. Haven't really had any status updates, so it could be Arch Manning time down there this week. And I feel for someone who pays this much attention to college football, I feel a little ignorant not having known this like really much before the year, but I didn't know that this was such a hated rivalry, and they haven't actually played since 2011, since A&M went to the SEC and left the Big 12. So this one's been circled on the calendars for a few years now that Texas got announced back to the SEC. A&M, heartbreaking loss last week at Auburn. Was it a look ahead spot potentially? But they're going to be psyched up and ready for this one. Is A&M able to keep it close? I think so. I think I'm going to take them to cover, but I do think Texas is still going to win this game and set us up for a rematch of that Georgia-Texas game from just about a month ago, where Georgia absolutely put it on them. But that would be a pretty crazy scenario too, and I think the college football world would embrace it if Texas A&M went to the title game and then Texas A&M beat Georgia in the SEC title game, and there are a 3-loss Aggies team in the playoff. That would actually add a lot of chaos and a new wrinkle to the season.
Yeah, enjoyed that game. That was a crazy, crazy game last week. Went to overtime between Auburn and A&M, 2.5-point spread, and obviously A&M did not get the job done. A very, very brutal loss at this point in time of the season for A&M, but still a lot to play for, as we just pointed out. Whoever wins will be in the conference championship game for the conference for the SEC. Now let's go ahead and take it up to the nightcap here. And again, there's just this is unfortunate. Look, we are getting some good games that are in the rivalry. Don't get me wrong. But Florida and Florida State, brutal, right? Like that game should have a little bit more oomph to it. Washington, Oregon was tremendous last year. Huge drop off from the team that actually went to the national championship game. 18.5-point spread. Kansas State and Iowa State. That game has a ton of meaning. Yeah, that's a big one. It's a 2.5-point spread here. Let's hit on that one, and then we'll go down the list as far as the big numbers. But Iowa State, so much to play for. Shout out Lettuce McClay. 51's our total. Your thoughts, Beef? Where are we going on this one?
Yeah, if as long as I read all the tiebreaker scenarios right, and the Big 12 is currently the wildest one, I believe it is Iowa State wins, they're in the title. Arizona State wins, they're in the title. So you have a little state title game there potentially, but I'm going to go Iowa State there at home. They hit a bit of a lull in the middle of the season, had a couple bad losses to Kansas and Texas Tech in a row. But over the course of the season, I think they've given you enough sample size to back them as the home team in the spot. And as we said, when you get to this point in the season, it's really kind of what do you have to play for? What more do you have to play for than a chance to go to the title game? I don't think Kansas State's mathematically eliminated, but I also think it's less than like a 5% chance that they go to the title game. So Iowa State, a whole lot of them more to play for. This is another rivalry matchup. Farmageddon, I believe, is what they call it. But I will take the Cyclones and McClay's boys to go in this one, and they're playing Dayton right now in college basketball, so hopefully they're doing well.
All right, let's wrap up on this one, and you can hit on any of these games that you got some passionate plays on that we possibly did not hit on here. But Washington, Oregon, again, we got to talk about it because it's the only undefeated team left in college football. Not asking for an outright victory in Eugene, but possibly to cover the number. Washington's been really bad this year, 50.5. This should be a slam dunk for Oregon.
Yeah, I would think so as well. But you can also kind of throw it back to what does Oregon have to play for? Oregon's in the Big Ten title game no matter what. Is it a situation where they get up and they kind of take their foot off the gas? Some of the starters come out, and you rest up next week for what's most likely going to be a matchup with Ohio State. You kind of look at it like that. So it's a game that I'm probably not going to touch. It's a rivalry game as well. I know DeBoer's not there, and a lot of the players from Washington aren't there now, but Washington did beat Oregon twice last year. So this is a game that has in the past gotten a little funky. I'm not going to touch anything just because I think there's a chance that Oregon could get up big and take their foot off the gas with already having a ticket punch to the Big Ten title game next weekend. Just say, even if they somehow found a way to lose this game and then they beat Ohio State next week, there's still a chance that they're probably going into the playoff as the number one team.
Wow. What's the number in that game? If you had to set a spread right now, what's it played at Lucas Oil? Is that where the
Big Ten championship going out to Lucas Oil Stadium for the Big Ten title game? Imagine saying that 20 years ago.
What's the spread in that?
That's it was a one. I think it was the final was 32-31, I believe, in the regular season game, which was at Oregon. I probably would just set it as Oregon -3. You give them the benefit of the doubt there as the team that won the regular season matchup. I know this one is at the neutral, and it's hard to beat a team twice, but I would probably put Oregon there at least at 2.5. I think it would be.
I want to disagree. I
I mean, I
don't
could
know.
certainly see it being flipped the other way.
Yeah,
Ohio State's
I think Ohio State's favored. I don't, for some odd reason, I just feel like Ohio State will be favored in that, and therein therein lies the truth of the conversation. Who will win the game? I think Ohio State will win it. But the betting perspective, it's interesting. It's going to be a great matchup, and
This was a
we have it.
scenario we talked about like all off season though, and I think everyone talked about it and they bashed Ohio State for losing the game at Oregon. But everyone said, "Oh, Oregon is home against Ohio State. Oregon will win that one, then they'll rematch in the Big Ten title game, and Ohio State will get them there." That's what
Right.
everyone said. That was like the most clear cut, crystal prediction I feel like across the board from people in the Big Ten. Maybe there was a Penn State discussion thrown in there in the mix, but that was kind of the discussion. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if Ohio State was a favorite in that one.
They're going to have a lot of people that are going to be putting their tweets with the bump on the top and bringing it to the top of the timeline. Yeah, that's exactly what I said. All right. Did we hit on everything, Beef? Do you have a game that we did not hit on here?
You didn't hit on the Iron Bowl at all.
Oh, Lord. What do we got there?
I mean, it definitely takes a big hit with Alabama losing last week, but Auburn, I think I heard someone say this earlier. I forget who it was, or I'll give them credit, but Auburn is the best bad team in college football. Like, they've had so many one possession games go the other way. Like, you look at Auburn, they could definitely be an 8-3 team themselves right now. They've just given games away at the end, and I think Hugh Freeze is going to get that turnaround down there. But for them to win that game last week against a pretty damn good A&M team that we've seen throughout the season, in historic kind of fashion there in the 4 overtimes, they're a team that's been playing pretty well over these past couple weeks, finding ways to win. That's what they weren't doing at the beginning of the year. With Alabama sitting there at 13, they get some chaos. Who knows? They could still find themselves in the field, so they still have something to play for sure. And arguably behind Ohio State and Michigan, the biggest rivalry in college football. You want to win that game, especially if you're DeBoer. If you go 8-4, you're feeling the heat. But I like Auburn to cover in this one and keep it close. I'm not going to pick them to win it outright, but even you remember last year, Jalen Milroe needed the crazy play on 4th down just to win that game outright last year. So this game gets funky. I'm going to take Auburn to cover. They've kept games close all year, and I think that they've been playing well as of recently. So I'll take them plus 11.5. Not courageous enough to take them outright, though.
Great breakdown, and I'm in agreement with you on that one. I like Auburn as well. That game was suspect. There was not a lot of effort on the road against Oklahoma there, and maybe that should have been looked, in a different light heading into the game. I wasn't thinking an outright upset. That's for dang sure. I haven't been all that impressed from Oklahoma. So that was a lackluster performance to a T, to the definition there. So I don't know if they're going to go ahead and hit this groove. And, like you said, DeBoer's got to find a way to win the game, but 11.5 is a lot of points. So I'm back in Auburn on that one as well. I like that play, Beef. Nice call by you in the Iron Bowl. All right, great stuff across the board. You know where to find them. Ryan Coyle 35, Beef up front as always. Good luck on those plays. We shall see what happens, and hopefully everybody has a great Thanksgiving. And enjoy the football, enjoy the games. Let's enjoy the results and see what we have for the college football playoff for the first time in our life. 12 teams. I believe December 20th is when it gets started. Bowl season is still rolling on, so a lot of college football to be discussed over these next couple of weeks, but they mean just a little bit more after this weekend. Ryan Beef Coyle, once again, great stuff as always. And for anybody that missed anything from this show or all of our podcasts, can be found at foxphlgambler.com.